Sergeant Dara O'Simonsa stood at the processing desk and watched the Crethful quartermaster stare at his equipment, manifest the way a dog stares at a ceiling fan. The quartermaster's skin flickered pale, yellow then orange, then a color Dara had no name for. He had been told that Crethful skin flicker was their version of facial expression. Right now, the quartermaster looked like a traffic light having a breakdown. This item, the quartermaster said. He pointed a three-jointed finger at the knife on the table. This is a listed combat instrument. Yes. It has no power cell. No. No targeting system. No. No charge cycle, no frequency output. No. No. The quartermaster flickered a deep, unhappy green. He picked up the knife by the handle and turned it over. It was 11 inches of carbon steel with a wrapped leather grip, worn smooth in exactly the places a hand would wear it smooth. It had been sharpened so many times the blade had a very slight hollow along its length, like a valley that took years of weather to form. The quartermaster set it down and called a supervisor. The supervisor came, looked at the knife, and called their supervisor. Within 4 minutes, there were 6 aliens standing around Dara's equipment table, photographing a piece of sharpened metal. A Valhari drone technician leaned so close to the blade that Dara could see its breath fogged the steel. A Thesavorn medic, forearmed with large pale eyes that blinked sideways, stood at the edge of the group and watched Dara instead of the knife. Dara found that more interesting than the rest of them combined. We will need to file a non-standard designation form, the first supervisor said. File whatever you need, Dara said. The manifest continued. The recurve bow came out of its case, and the room went quiet in the way rooms go. Quiet when something genuinely unexpected happens. The Valhari drone technician actually stepped back. The Crethful quartermaster's skin went completely white, which Dara later learned was the equivalent of an open mouth. This, the quartermaster said. Bow, Dara said. Recurve 60 lb draw. She fires carbon fiber arrows, 9 diameter. There was a long pause. Coalition policy, the first supervisor said carefully, restricts kinetic projectile weapons to 40 diameter. Minimum for tracking purposes, 4. Sensor logging, 4. 9 is under 40. Yes. So there's no policy. The supervisor opened his mouth, closed. His skin did something complicated. There is no policy, he admitted, because there was no reason to anticipate. Sure, Dara said. He said it the way a door closes. The four-armed medic at the edge of the group, the one who had been watching Dara instead of the weapons, took a small step forward. His name badge read Thesavorn in Coalition script. He had a gentle way of moving, like someone who had learned to be careful with his hands, because there were 4 of them and things broke easily. Are these, Thesavorn said, and he paused, choosing his words with real care. Are these ceremonial? Dara looked at the bow, then he looked at Thesavorn. No, he said. Thesavorn nodded slowly. He looked at the knife, he looked at the bow, he looked at Dara with those pale, sideways, blinking eyes and said nothing else, and Dara found he respected that. The processing took another 40 minutes. Every item in Dara's kit that had no power cell, no frequency output, no electronic signature of any kind. required its own non-standard designation form. There were 6 such items. Quartermaster's skin had settled into grim, resigned gray by the time they finished. At the end, the quartermaster held his forms in both hands and looked at Dara, with what Dara was fairly sure was the Krethval equivalent of deep personal suffering. "I am required," the quartermaster said, "to ask you to justify the inclusion of weapons that require manual operation, physical training over multiple years, and produce no electromagnetic signature and therefore cannot be logged by coalition battlefield systems." The room had gone quiet again. Supervisors were still there. Thessivorn was still there. Even the drone technician had stayed, pretending to check something on a tablet. Dara looked at the quartermaster for a moment. "They work when yours don't," he said. The quartermaster went very still. His skin stopped flickering altogether, which Dara later learned was something Krethval almost never did. It was the equivalent of a human holding their breath. Nobody wrote it down. Nobody needed to. It sat in the air of that processing room, and every alien in it felt the specific weight of a sentence that sounds simple and lands like a structural beam. Dara picked up his knife and returned her to her sheath. He picked up the bow and slung her across his back. He shouldered his pack. "When do I bunk?" he asked. The quartermaster pointed, still pale, still motionless. Dara walked to his quarters through corridors full of alien personnel who moved out of his way by instinct. The way people move out of the way of someone who is walking with total certainty about where they are going and why. He set his pack down, unsheathed the knife, held her for a moment in the quiet of a room that smelled like recycled air and alien cleaning solution. In a station 40 light years from the continent where the knife was made, she was the same temperature as his hand. She always was. He put her down gently on the cot beside him and lay back and stared at the ceiling, and outside his door the station hummed and clicked with the sound of a coalition that had never had to ask why anyone would keep a weapon that had no power cell and no sensor output and no targeting system. They were about to start figuring that out. He would not explain it to them. Some things you figure out on your own, or you don't figure them out at all. He closed his eyes. The knife lay beside him, patient and cool and utterly without apology for being exactly what she was. The patrol assignment came through on a Tuesday, or what passed for Tuesday, on a station that ran on a 26-hour cycle. Nobody had bothered to rename. Dara read the brief over coffee that tasted like hot water that had heard rumors about coffee and was doing its best. Commander Vrethsal led the unit. He was Velhari, which meant he was tall, angular, and ran his tactical assessments through a system that could model 11 variables simultaneously and produce a priority-ranked threat response in under 2 seconds. He had served in 4 coalition engagements, received 3 unit commendations, and had never once in his career been required to make a decision without his tactical system giving him a category first. Dara read Vrethsal's record the same way he read terrain, looking for the gaps. The unit was 8 personnel, 4 Velhari, 2 Krethval, the Savorn, and Dara. They ran 2 orientation drills before deployment. In both drills, Dara watched how the others moved, how they communicated, how long each of them took between receiving information and acting on it. Vrethsal clocked at 1.3 seconds. His system running, that was genuinely impressive. The canyon on the third day of the patrol was called something in coalition cartography that translated roughly as Dry Channel 7. It was about 2 km of rock walls and loose ground running between two ridgelines, and Dara knew it was wrong. Inside the first 40 steps. Not from sensors, not from any reading on any device, from the way the air sat in it. There is a specific kind of quiet that is not quiet, it is quiet with something inside it, the way a held breath is not the same as relaxed breathing. Dara had grown up around enough spaces that could hurt him to know the difference between empty silence and occupied silence. The canyon was occupied. He stopped walking. Behind him, the unit stopped because he stopped. Vrethsal moved up beside him. Threat assessment, Vrethsal asked. His tactical system was already running. Dara could see the faint light of its output reflected in the commander's visor. Hold, Dara said. I need a threat vector to authorize defensive posture. I don't have one yet. There was a pause. Vrethsal's system required a vector. The system's entire architecture was built around receiving specific information and producing specific outputs. Dara was handing it nothing, and it was not built for nothing. What are you detecting? Vrethsal asked. I'm listening, Dara said. To what? Dara didn't answer. He stood still in a way that the alien members of the unit found deeply uncomfortable because it was not the stillness of waiting for a system to process. It was the stillness of an animal in the moment before it decides which direction to run or whether to run at all. He listened with ears that had no augmentation, no frequency filter, no enhancement of any kind. 200,000 years of ears. Ears that had listened for things in grass and trees and caves and ruins, burned out buildings in jungles and deserts and mountain passes and city streets where the noise was its own kind of silence. 40 seconds. The Kreth Val at the back of the unit shifted their weight. 60 seconds. Vrethsal's tactical system registered. Nothing, no heat, no electronic signature, no movement. 90 seconds. There, a sound that was almost not a sound, loose stones settling under. Weight that shouldn't be there. Directional, 45 degrees off the left ridgeline. Approximately 60 m. Dara unshouldered the bow. No charge cycle, no targeting. Acquisition tone, no electronic bloom. He knocked an arrow in one practiced motion that had been practiced so many times it had stopped living in the thinking part of his brain and moved into something older and quieter. He drew. He breathed. He released. The arrow crossed 60 m of canyon air, and the only sound it made was the sound arrows make, which is a sound very few things in a coalition engagement expect to hear. The myriad scout dropped without a word. On both sides, every sensor array registered the threat exactly 1 second after it stopped being a threat. Vrethsal stared at the ridge, then at the shape on the ground 60 m ahead, then at the bow in Dara's hands. Your weapon made no sound, he said. Dara was already knocking a second arrow. She never does, he said. They cleared the canyon in 11 minutes. 2 more contacts, both resolved before coalition systems logged them as threats. Thesivorn patched a Krethval with a grazed shoulder and kept glancing at Dara the whole time with those pale, sideways eyes processing something that his medical training had not covered. In the debrief, a coalition intelligence officer named Bryn Caldwell, one of the other human advisors attached to the station, a thin woman with reading glasses she did not strictly need but wore because they made her feel organized, pulled Dara's service record. While Vrethsal was still talking, she found the field archaic weapon systems specialist certification. She found the date he first certified. She found how long humans had formally integrated archaic weapons into active deployment doctrine. She did the math. She did it again. Dara, she said quietly, leaning across the debrief table, they're going to ask you how long humans have used bows in combat. I know. What are you going to tell them? He looked at her, the truth. She sat back. That's going to break something in at least one of them. Probably, he agreed. Vreth shall ask the question 20 minutes later in front of the full debrief room. He framed it respectfully as a tactical inquiry, as a question about the bows, operational history and deployment timeline. Dara told him. Vreth shall ran the number through his tactical system. It came back with a flag Dara would have loved to see. Historical range exceeds system parameters. The room was quiet. Vreth shall looked at Dara. That is not possible, he said, not rudely, just genuinely, as a statement of what his system had told him. She still works, Dara said, so we kept her. He said it the same way he said everything, like a door closing, like that was the beginning and the end of the explanation, and the space between those 2 points needed no filling. Bryn Caldwell across the table took her glasses off and polished them. She did this when she was trying not to smile. Vreth Shao was still sitting with historical range exceeds system parameters running in the corner of his visor. He was trying to find the tactical framework for what had just happened in that canyon, and he kept arriving at the same problem. The threat was neutralized before his system knew it existed by a weapon his system had no category for, operated by a human using senses his system could not replicate. He was an excellent commander. He filed the debrief accurately, completely, and with the particular discomfort of someone who has just discovered a gap in something they thought was complete. He flagged the report for coalition intelligence. He wrote in the notes field in very careful language that the humans' non-electronic weapons had neutralized 2 threats that coalition sensor arrays had failed to detect, and that the human had identified the enemy presence through what appeared to be unaugmented auditory observation. He did not know how to write what he had actually seen, which was a man stand still in a canyon and listen with his body until the canyon told him what was in it, and then reach for a weapon older than the coalition's oldest member species and put it to use with the calm of someone completing a task they have done so many times it has become part of them. There was no form field for that. He submitted the report anyway. 3 floors above the debrief room in the station's intelligence processing wing, an analyst opened the report, read the flagged section, and sat back in her chair. She read it again. She forwarded it to her supervisor with a single line of annotation. The annotation said, "We may have been asking the wrong questions about the human unit. Her supervisor read it. Her supervisor forwarded it further up. The question of what the knife was for, and what the bow was for, and what it meant that a species had kept them working and deployed and in the hands of a trained soldier 40 light years from the place they were made was moving through the coalition systems now. Nobody had an answer yet, but the question was loose. And in Dara's quarters the knife lay on the cot beside him in the dark, patient and cool and old in the way that only useful things get old, worn smooth in exactly the places it needed to be worn, sharp in exactly the places it needed to be sharp. She still worked, so she stayed. Thessavorn came to find him 2 evenings later, not officially, not with a form or a debrief request. He showed up at the door to Dara's quarters with 2 containers of something that was not quite tea but was warm and had the decency to be honest about that, and he handed one to Dara without asking if Dara wanted it. Dara moved over on the cot and let him sit. The sound of the stone on the knife's edge filled the small room, steady, rhythmic, a sound that had nothing to do with any of the machinery humming in the walls around them. Thessavorn held his container in 2 of his 4 hands and watched. He had that quality Dara had noticed of being able to be present in a space without requiring the space to perform. For him, most of the aliens Dara had met in his first month on the station treated silence like a problem to be solved. Thessavorn treated it like weather. You just waited for it to change, or you didn't, and either way you were still there. Where did she come from? Thessavorn asked. He had the careful diction of someone speaking in their third language, choosing each word like a step on uncertain ground. Dara turned the blade in the low light. A forge, he said. In Ghana, a man named Kofi Asant. His father made knives. His father's father. He paused. She has been in 3 conflicts. 3 words for each piece. He stopped there. Thessavorn nodded. He looked at the knife for a while. Then he asked the question that Dara had been waiting for someone to ask, because it was the obvious question, the one all of them had been circling since the processing disk on day 1. Do you carry old weapons because your new ones are not good enough? The stone moved along the blade. No, Dara said. The stone moved again. Then why? Dara held the knife flat, edge up, and looked at the line of it. You ever lose someone? He said, and then he stopped. He set the stone down. Never mind. Thessavorn was quiet. He did not push. He did not fill the space Dara had left open. He just sat with it, and Dara found that after a moment the open space was not uncomfortable. It was just honest. I think I understand, Thessavorn said. Finally, gently. You don't not mean just true, but you're sitting here, so. Thessavorn blinked sideways. So that's the whole thing right there. Thessavorn looked at the knife again. Does she have a name? Dara thought about it. No, she's just she. Why she? Dara picked up the stone and resumed the slow, careful rhythm. Same reason ships are she, same reason storms are she. He paused. Things that can carry you or end you, you show them that kind of respect. Thessavorn absorbed this. He was quiet. For a long time, a Velhari general named Orithful passed the open door, saw Dara sharpening the knife, and stopped. Orithful was the kind of officer who spoke in full sentences and expected complete answers. He had the build of someone who had never needed to apologize for taking up space. "Sergeant," he said, "that blade could it be replicated, modern composite. Materials same profile, mass issue too. Human units as a backup instrument." Dara looked up from the blade he held. The general's eyes for a moment. "You could make the shape," he said. He returned to sharpening. The general waited, nothing more came. And the general said. "That was the answer," Dara said. The general stood in the doorway for a moment longer, then walked on with the expression of a man who had asked a simple question and received something he would be thinking about for the rest of the week. Thesivorn waited until the sound of the general's footsteps faded. "You could have explained," he said. He would have heard the words, Dara said. He wouldn't have heard the thing underneath them. Those aren't the same. Thesivorn thought about this. What is underneath them? Dara was quiet for a moment. The stone moved. "My grandfather carried a knife like this one," he said. "Not this one, his own. He carried it through two things I won't name in a room this size. He came back. The knife came back. He gave it to my father. My father gave me this one." He paused. "You can't mass produce that. You can make the shape. The shape is not the thing." Thesivorn said nothing. The stone moved along the blade. After a long time, Thesivorn said, "On my world there is a practice when someone we have lost is carried to rest. We keep one small object of theirs. We call it a thread because we believe the person is still at the other end of it." Dara did not look up. "We do not really believe it," Thesivorn said. "We know they are gone. But we hold the thread anyway because letting go of the thread feels like losing them twice." The room was quiet except for the stone. "Yeah," Dara said. That was all. Thesivorn went back to his quarters, and an hour later, he sat at his desk and did something he would not have admitted to. In a formal report, he looked up the forge. Dara had named the name, the location, the record. It took him a while to find it. Coalition databases were not built for the geography of a single continent on a single human world. He found it. He sat with what he found for a long time. The forge was gone, destroyed in a conflict that the database listed with a date and a region and a casualty estimate. The conflict was one Dara had been deployed in. The database listed Dara as one of the personnel who returned from it. The man named Kofi Asant was not listed among those who returned. Thesivorn closed the database. He sat in the dark of his quarters and held his warm container of not quite tea and thought about threads, about the thing at the other end of them, about a man standing at a processing desk with a knife on a table and 6 aliens photographing it like it was an artifact, and the man saying nothing, just waiting for them to finish because the knife did not need their understanding to be what she was. She still worked. The next time Dara sharpened the blade, Thesivorn came and sat across from him. Again, he brought 2 containers of the warm thing. He did not ask any questions. He just sat. And Dara, who had not asked him to come, and would not have asked him to, moved over on the cot to make room. The sound of stone on steel filled the small room. Outside the walls, the station hummed and blinked and processed and filed and ran 11 variables simultaneously and produced priority-ranked outputs in under 2 seconds, and none of it was louder than that sound or older or more honest about what it was. The Marath commander, known in Coalition intelligence files as designation 7 times rebuilt, did not receive that name as a compliment. She had earned it across 4 campaigns, 3 command losses, and 2 structural rebuilds of her tactical doctrine from the ground up each time she encountered something her existing model could not hold. She was not sentimental about being wrong, she was methodical about it. She sat in her command center with the Canyon engagement data open on the display in front of her, and she was being methodical now. The coalition unit had been manageable. Standard Velhari tactical formations, predictable energy, weapon signatures, drone support running on frequencies she had already mapped. She had planned the Canyon operation to exploit all of those things simultaneously. It had worked perfectly on 6 of the 8 personnel. The other 2 were the problem, and of the 2, 1 was the problem. Replay the engagement from the ridge sensor, she said. Her aide replayed it. She watched the human stop walking. She watched him stand still for 90 seconds, while his unit held behind him, and his commander system was clearly querying. For a threat vector it was not receiving. She watched the stillness. She had good sensor data on this part. The human was doing nothing visible. What is he detecting? She asked. Unknown, her intelligence officer said. No sensor output, no system query, no visible instrument use. Then what is he using? A pause. Himself, the intelligence officer said. He sounded uncomfortable with the answer. 7 times rebuilt. Watched the human draw the bow. She watched the release. She watched her scout drop. She had reviewed the timestamp 6 times. The human's weapon had engaged 41 seconds before her scout registered as a threat on any coalition sensor. 41 seconds was not a lag. 41 seconds was a different category of weapon entirely. He detected a concealed target through an augmented biological observation, she said, and engaged with a weapon that produces no electromagnetic signature. Yes, Commander. Our countermeasures are built around electromagnetic signature detection and frequency jamming. Yes, Commander. She closed the engagement data. He is not an anomaly, she said. He is a doctrine. Find out how many of them there are. The intelligence report came back in 3 days. It was longer than she expected, and less reassuring than she needed. Humans had been formally integrating archaic weapon systems, bows bladed, weapons chemically propelled projectile weapons into active deployment doctrine. For decades, not as ceremony, not as tradition, as tactical supplements for environments where electronic systems failed, were jammed, or were detected and targeted. The reasoning, as far as her intelligence officer could reconstruct, it was simple. Every other species in the coalition had upgraded linearly. New weapons replaced old ones. The old ones went into museums or storage or were melted down. Humans upgraded and kept. The old weapon stayed active, stayed trained, stayed deployed. 7 times rebuilt, read the report. Twice they kept obsolete weapons operational, she said. Yes, Commander. Why? Her intelligence officer was quiet for a moment. The report suggests, he said carefully, that humans do not fully believe the obsolete scenario will not recur. She thought about this. They have better weapons now, she said. Yes. And they kept the old ones anyway. Yes, because they remember what it was like when the old ones were all they had. Her intelligence officer said nothing. She stood up and walked to the viewport. The canyon on the surface below was a thin dark line from this altitude. Her scout was still down there. The coalition would have recovered the body by now. An arrow carbon fiber 9 diameter. Her countermeasures registered nothing. Her snort's frequency jammers would do nothing against it. Her thermal detection systems would catch the human's body heat but not the weapon's output, because the weapon had no output. The weapon was a human body, a bent piece of manufactured composite, and a string. She had spent 4 campaigns building systems to defeat systems. The human had walked around the outside of all of them with a piece of engineering that was older than her civilization. She turned back to the room. Prepare a full suppression operation. She said, I want every electronic system in that coalition unit. Non-functional, communications, weapons, navigation, medical, all of it. The humans' archaic weapons will still function, her intelligence officer said. I know. Then how does suppression? We will be ready for him, she said. We know what he has, we know what it does. We will be ready. She was not ready. The suppression operation was technically perfect. Every coalition weapon system went down, communications were dead, drone support was offline. The Valhari tactical systems were running on backup only. The coalition unit was effectively fighting with their hands, which it turned out was a thing humans had been preparing for since before they had metal. 7 times rebuilt watched through the one drone she had kept off frequency, broadcasting on a narrow band her people had used since before the coalition existed, and therefore not included in the coalition's jamming protocols. She watched the human. He did not hesitate when his radio went down. He did not look at his equipment. In confusion, he reached for the knife. The way you reach for something you have carried so long it has become part of the weight of you, the thing you stop noticing until you need it, and then your hand is already there. What came after was not tactical. She could not file it as tactical. She had the sensor data and she could see the numbers, and the numbers made sense, but the thing underneath, the numbers, did not have a name in any language she worked in. He was not fast exactly, he was efficient in a way that was more than fast. Every movement was the minimum required for the outcome, which meant it was also the fastest possible version of that movement, but it was not speed that defined it. It was the absence of anything extra, no hesitation, no recalibration, no moment of processing, deciding and doing. Her people had trained for hand-to-hand engagement. They were good at it. The human was not good at it. The human was inside a different category. The human was doing something that had been trained into him at a level below his thinking, something that had been trained into the humans training him below their thinking, trained down through generations of people who needed it to work when everything else had stopped working. She gave the order to disengage, not because she was losing on numbers. They had the numbers. She gave the order because she was watching through that narrow band drone and something below. Her tactical thinking told her to stop. Something old, something that recognized what it was looking at. Her intelligence officer sent the after-action request. She sat down to Write the tactical note on the human unit and found that she was writing something different from what she intended. She had intended to write a conventional threat assessment, weapons, profile, engagement range, countermeasure limitations. She wrote, do not engage the one with the old weapons in enclosed space. She paused. She wrote, do not engage him when communications are down. She paused again. She wrote, do not make him feel cornered. His civilization has been cornered before. They survived it. Old weapons are the proof of that. They are not tradition. They are not sentiment. They are species saying in the plainest language available, we were here before you found us, and we will be here after this is over. She stopped writing. She looked at what she had produced. It was not a tactical assessment. It was something closer to a recognition. A species identifying another species. Across a gap of technology and biology and history, and arriving at a piece of information that the tactical systems could not generate. These are not people who forgot to upgrade. These are people who upgraded and remembered anyway. She filed the note as priority 1. She closed the display. She thought about the canyon, about the 41 seconds, about a weapon that made no sound and left no signature and hit something her sensors had not found yet. She had built her career on being methodical about being wrong. She was being methodical now. She did not know what to do with what she had found. That was, she supposed, where you started. The ceremony was held in Bay 7, which was the largest space on the station. That wasn't a hangar and smelled significantly better than a hangar, which was the best that could be said for it. The coalition had strung lights along the upper supports, which gave the whole thing the feeling of a celebration being assembled by people who had read about celebrations but attended very few. Dara stood in his dress uniform at the back of the formation and looked at the lights and thought they were trying. He respected trying. The award ceremony was officially for the unit's performance in what coalition command was now calling the dry channel engagement, which was a name that made the canyon sound like a plumbing problem. Vressel was receiving a unit commendation. The Kressel were receiving something that translated roughly as a merit of tactical endurance. Thessavorn was receiving a medical service recognition. Dara was receiving something the form called distinguished non-standard tactical contribution. Bryn Caldwell had read him the name of the award from across the mess hall table 2 days before the ceremony, and then looked at him over her glasses. Non-standard, she had said. Sure, he had said. She had gone back to her coffee. The bow was across his back. The knife was at his hip. He had not been asked to leave them in his quarters, and he had not volunteered to. Nobody snorts on this station had yet found the right words to tell him his weapons did not belong at a formal function, because nobody on this station had yet found the right words for what his weapons were. Coalition intelligence had intercepted and translated 7 times rebuilds. Tactical note 3 weeks before the ceremony. Dara had not been shown the full text. He had been shown the last section. Bryn Caldwell had brought it to him. She had printed it on physical paper, which was how he knew she wanted him to have something to hold. He had read it twice. He had folded it and put it in his breast pocket. He had not talked about it. Vrethal gave the official commendation speech. It was a good speech. It covered the tactical facts of the dry channel, engagement accurately and in detail, and entirely missed the thing that had actually happened, the way a photograph of a fire is accurate about the shape of the fire and tells you nothing about the heat. Then the Savorn stood up. He was not on the program, he stood up from his seat in the middle of Vrethal's closing remarks, and Vrethal, to his genuine credit, stopped mid-sentence and looked at him and then sat down, because there was something in the way. The Savorn stood that said this was not an interruption, this was something that needed to happen. The Savorn spoke slowly, he was still working in his third language and he took his time with it. He talked about a forge in Ghana, name a man. He talked about what he had found in the database. He talked about what it meant to hold a thread when the person at the other end of it was gone, and how you did not really believe it helped, and how you did it anyway, and how that was not weakness. He said that word clearly, not weakness. He looked at Dara while he said it. Dara looked at a fixed point on the wall above the lights. His jaw moved once. Then it stopped, then it was still. The room was quiet in the way a room goes quiet when it has been handed something it needs to sit with. Rethsauer spoke again after the Savorn sat off script. He said his prepared notes to the side and asked Dara if he would speak. Just speak, not a formal address, just explain the weapons to the assembled coalition, as many of whom as could fit in Bay 7 were here, standing along the walls because the seats were full. Dara was quiet long enough that the silence became a kind of answer on its own. Then he stepped forward. He did not speak from notes, he did not move to a podium. He stood where he was, with the bow across his back and the knife at his hip, and looked out at the room. Every species here upgraded, he said. You got better weapons, you retire the old ones, we did too. He paused. We also kept the old ones. He let that sit. You want to know why? He said. It was not quite a question. The room was full of people who wanted to know why. Because we didn't always have the better ones, he said, and we remember what that was like. We don't want to remember, we remember anyway. The knife and the bow aren't history, they're a conversation we're still having with every person who held them before us in a place where the better option wasn't available. They're proof that we were there, and we kept going. He reached down and drew the knife. He held her flat in both hands. The ceremony lights ran along the edge of her. She was old in the way that only useful things get old. She was smooth in the places hands had worn her smooth. She was sharp in the places she needed to be sharp. She had been made in a forge that was gone. She had been carried by a man who was gone. She had crossed 3 conflicts and 40 light years and ended up in a bay full of aliens who had no form field for what she was. She still works, Dara said, so she stays. He returned her to the sheath. The room did not applaud. It was not an applause moment, it was something else. The something else filled Bay 7 the way good silence fills a room, not empty, but full of the thing that doesn't have a word yet. Bryn Caldwell, in the second row with her glasses on and her hands folded in her lap, was looking at the ceiling with the expression of someone who was not going to cry in a room full of aliens. Vrethsal was looking at the knife, at the place on Dara's hip where the knife now rested. His tactical system had no category for what the knife was. It had never had one. he was beginning to understand that the absence of a category was not a problem with his system. It was a true thing about the knife. The form came back to Dara's bunk the next morning, 17 pages. The field that read sentimental value was still there. So was the field labeled operational classification, so were 15 other fields that reached for the same thing from 15 different directions and came away with nothing each time. Dara crossed out every pre-printed option in the operational classification field. He wrote 2 words in the margin in small neat print. Still works. The clerk who processed the form read it. She held the form for a while, then she typed it into the database exactly as written because there was no policy for what to do when a soldier answered a 17-page form in 2 words and the 2 words were more complete than the 17 pages. The entry sat in the coalition database under a classification field that had never been used before and has never been used since. It was not an exciting field. It was 2 words. It didn't explain anything. That was the point. In a Mirath archive in a wing reserved for Priority 1 intelligence assessment, 7 times rebuilt. Tactical note sat flagged in unresolved. She had never encountered the human unit again after the canyon. She had moved to a different theater of operations. She had rebuilt her doctrine a 5th time and then a 6th. She did not remove the flag from the note. She thought about the canyon more than she filed reports about. She thought about the 41 seconds. She thought about a weapon that made no sound and left no signature, and in the middle of a fully suppressed engagement was still working because it had never needed what she had taken away. She thought about 2 words she had written without planning to write them. The old weapons are the proof. She had meant proof of survival, proof that the species had been in places where nothing else worked and had come out the other side still holding what they came in with. She thought sometimes that she had meant something else too, something she hadn't had the language for when she wrote it and still didn't quite. Proof that they had decided at some point a very long time ago that some things were worth carrying even when you could put them down, that the carrying itself was the statement, not I am armed, not I am dangerous, something older and quieter than both. I was here before this, and I will be here after. The knife in the sheath on Dara's hip understood this without words. She had always understood it. She was made of it. She still worked. She stayed.